I got the Snorks behind me. It's David Hale's episode. My old boss, mentor, friend, the man
introduced us to each other.
So there's no Breakfast Club without this conversation.
Yeah, he should have been our first guest. We screwed up because none of this he's the reason why it's all happened.
Yeah, when I first saw him around the office, he's like on first notice a quiet person.
Yeah, he's very soft-spoken. He comes across very soft-spoken. Yeah,
he kind of I'd see him getting coffee, say hello, but then had started having conversations with him, and I'd find myself going in to ask him a question about a clause in the contract, and I'd be in there for an hour.
Yeah,
and just not just talking about work, but he and I bonded over so many things. Like, we had rough mentors before that hadn't given us the right kind of grounding to become lawyers, and so we bonded over that, and he was one of those for me, and just a great lawyer, great privacy lawyer, IP lawyer, tech lawyer, litigator, and he's pretty much contracts. There's not much he can't do. He's truly a general counsel, even though he's kind of served in a CPO, deputy general counsel function for a while.
Yeah, David presents quiet, but he's got a lot to say because he's got a lot of experience, man, and he's seen a lot of things. Like, he's seen some things, you know what I mean? And I feel like under his calm demeanor and quiet disposition, there is a a raging volcano.
We didn't get into this on the call, but he did run all of our all the tech litigation, Ameritrade. So you can't do that job without being upset at some point, right?
Exactly.
Just that's upsetting set of things to be working on and doing.
Exactly. Can we talk about how that orange snork behind you is wearing an Hermes belt? What a fashion statement, man! It's a whole thing, man.
It's
looking good.
It's a weird show. I watched it.
Look at all the gender tropes behind you. It's so weird.
Let me just say, this episode is not in support of the Snorks as a show.
I watched the Snorks when I was a kid, man. I'm not gonna act like I didn't. They were just weird little creatures with round heads and big eyes, but they talk a lot for being underwater. I mean, that's cool.
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't figure that out. I don't know. They just let that go.
Yeah. Well, let's do it, man.
All right. Here we are, Pedro.
We're here. Keanu's here.
Here we are with our old friend David Hale, who is now a partner at Brownstein Hyatt, but before that, Chief Privacy Officer at TD Ameritrade, my boss, my friend, my mentor, great lawyer, swimmer, foodie extraordinaire. So a lot to talk about here, but he introduced us to each other. So
he did.
This whole thing is not happening without David Hale.
Thank you, David. Keanu cares so much, he's chewing on a heart. This is what he does.
I'm curious how you guys met, and then.
I know it was IAPP. I know it was some IAPP thing. I'm pretty sure, David, but I don't know.
I think we just sat next to each other at a breakfast or lunch or something
like that
at an IAPP conference and started talking. I think you were still at a law firm then.
That was a long time ago. Yeah, I was still at the firm. Yeah.
And then I kept track of you. And when you were at Oracle, I reached out to you for some track I was organizing for IAPP. And
that's right.
That's how it all went together.
Yeah, we met over some bad breakfast at a conference hotel. Probably some worse coffee, bad breakfast and worse coffee, but no, we had a good chat. I remember that moment. So now that you mentioned it specifically, I recall exactly how we met. Yeah, one of those round tables in the in the lobby where they had the IPP served that cold coffee and breakfast.
Exactly.
I was fortunate enough to have the office next door to yours, and that happened for me at a time when I was really just doing all these commercial contracts and stuff at TD Ameritrade. And as we've talked about, Pedro, before, so many privacy issues come up via the contract angle. And it's just so lucky that he was right next door to me, because I probably annoyed him asking a bunch of questions. But obviously that was a formative time for me. And so I guess maybe a good place to, because David, you were the first person I knew that really started talking about, I mean, other than like health privacy, which had been an issue at my law firm before, in this context, in the business context, in the tech context, it was the first time I'd seen someone who was really focused on that. And I think it's an interesting story and place to start, because if I remember correctly, the GC of Ameritrade sort of said to you, like, you have to do this. We don't have anybody else that can do this. Is that how that went?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much right. I started off, I was originally hired at Ameritrade I was an IP lawyer, doing trademarks and some litigation. Was hired by them to manage the patent litigation and manage the IP portfolio. And was there for, I don't know, maybe a month, maybe 6 weeks, when Ellen Koplow, the VC, walked in and got this privacy question. And it's sort of closer to what you do than any of the other 4 attorneys at the time. So you're it, and go find outside counsel to answer it, right? But it was 2002. I couldn't find outside counsel, right? I mean, they just weren't around, and it was easier to just answer the question. And then, next thing I know, a year later, it's half of what I do. And then I left. Actually, it was enough. It was becoming enough of what I did that I actually left Ameritrade for a couple of years to join a firm, Wildman Herald, in Chicago. That actually was one of the few groups that actually had a focus in privacy at that point in 2004, 2005, right? So, I felt like I just had no idea what I was doing, right? And making it up as I was going along, and not really realizing that at that point, that's what everybody was doing, right? We were all kind of making it up as we were going along and figuring it out, right? And so that was a good experience. A couple years later, family reasons, I reached out to Ellen to see if she had any ideas of places I could go back in Maryland, and she said, "Yeah, come back and we'll make you be privacy specifically," right? And which was great. I was happy to come back, and ultimately ended up taking IP back as well, right? And eventually built a team that was both IP and privacy. But most of my time was focused on privacy for the last 15 years or so.
It was also all of the technology, and I feel like that's how you and I started working together more and more. Was obviously I was on the contract side, and I had a different boss that was a contracts person. She left. I went and worked in your group for you. But prior to that, we had bought this company right when I joined, this Thinkorswim, this options platform that was really like a startup with a heavy emphasis on building technology. And because of that, I was supporting them on all their contracts and the diligence side of that transaction. I ended up becoming the person they called about their technology questions. And then we ended up having a lot of the innovation flow through our team, which was really fortunate. And that ended up being, I think, just I would have maybe paint it with a broader brush. It was like tech, innovation, privacy, data. Is that how you felt about it?
Yeah, that's right. Along with marketing, right? And those 2 areas were really kind of and I think privacy was a huge driving issue in both of those groups, but that wasn't all of it, right? There was obviously IP and a lot of contracting questions. While you were there, you handled a lot of the marketing contracts, a lot of the technology contracts, but that kind of moved in and out of what I was doing. Sometimes we had contract lawyers who did more technology stuff, and sometimes it tended to land more in my world. But yeah, that's right. It was all of those things together, and in some ways it's kind of hard to pull them apart, right? That things are so integrated to each other.
Yeah.
It's hard to it's hard to say, well, I'm just a privacy attorney, or I'm just a technology attorney, or I'm just an IP attorney. I mean, 3 of the patent suits I worked on were on security technologies, right? On encryption issues, right? And so, it felt like everything, everything synergized, so to speak, all the time.
Pedro, how does that work at Facebook or Salesforce or Oracle or one of the past companies where the number of attorneys is just larger? Ameritrade is obviously a bigger company than where I work now with more lawyers, but not nearly the scale of the legal department of those companies. How does that work with? Does everybody have to know a little bit about everything still?
I think commercial lawyers have to be conversational in our work, right? At those big these big companies, Facebook, Salesforce, and Oracle. Like, you can't be a successful commercial attorney and not have like some privacy and cybersecurity basis to do your job, because there just aren't enough privacy lawyers to cover all of the transactions these companies do, right? And that require like legal attention. So I think there's a baseline. I would call it like conversational working knowledge that all lawyers at tech companies just sort of have to have if they're touching product, whether that's through transactions or they're like product counseling, right? With that said, though, privacy and cybersecurity have each separately gotten so deep as practice areas. The idea of having a privacy and security lawyer that is the same person, to me, is ridiculous at this point. And some companies still try to do that. The other thing is it's gotten so deep and complicated that now you're seeing subspecialties within both, right? So like there are, like, for example, just to stick with Salesforce as the example, Salesforce breaks its legal team into like the privacy legal team, the product legal team, and then like they call it something new now, but it was like cyber and technology legal team, which is more of a data security team, legal team, right? Within the privacy team that I lived in, for example, like I was the CCPA guy, I was the Latin America guy, I was the LGPD guy, right? These kind of things. We had a HIPAA person, we had an employment privacy person, like very much subspecialized. Cyber was the same. We had like a public sector security, data security person. We had a whatever, I don't know, all these different verticals. If you've got the money and the resources to make that happen, it's awesome. You need it, right? What I don't understand about privacy and cyber as practice areas is how much dabbling I see happen. If I was at a small company and I did not have a tax legal department and I had a tax legal question, I wouldn't ask my commercial law generalist to like hash out the old tax question for me, right? And you wouldn't do that with like, I don't know, like an SEC issue. But somehow with privacy, yeah, it's like, hey, jump on the Google and let me know what's going on with like this part of like, with the DMA in Europe. Like, I don't know why privacy law as a practice lends itself to a lot of dabbling. And that's where I think I see a lot of companies make mistakes, which is like, I'm the chief compliance officer and the chief privacy officer. What? Like, how's that even possible? Like, how do you do those two jobs effectively? I don't understand. I'm also the head of cybersecurity legal. I'm also, what? Like, how do you, one human being do all of this? It's not possible. Even oversee all of this is not possible because they're just such diverse practice areas. So I don't know why our practice lends itself to dabbling. I think the bigger companies are starting to realize that like hyper specialization within privacy and cyber is necessary if you want to be like out in front and solving complex problems. Like Facebook and Google, for example, not only do we have the most complex issues, we have to solve them first. The rest of the industry is kind of, what's Google going to do? What's Facebook going to do? What's Microsoft going to do? What's Amazon going to do? What's Apple going to do? And so we have to do, I think, the hyper specialization. And I think the companies I just mentioned all sort of do it.
Yeah, I think that's right. That but there is sort of a limitation to how much you can specialize if you've got a legal group that's, 5 people or
Right.
one person or, even 40, right? I mean, when Ameritrade was acquired by Schwab, we had, I think, 42 people in the legal department, of which, I don't know, maybe 25, 27 attorneys. And, how much of your bandwidth there can you dedicate to those sorts of issues? Now, we had 2 privacy people, we had, some IP people separate and cross-trained on privacy, but privacy and cybersecurity, right? But ultimately, can't have a team of 20 if the whole team is 20. And so I think it is a balance, and I think it's you have to do the best you can, right? And with the resources that you're able to bear given the size of your company.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Right? I mean, it's not on. That's not a. It's not a small company by any means, right? So I think there's, you have to, be thoughtful about how you allocate those resources when you don't have the resources of a place like Facebook or Google.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ameritrade ran lean, and always ran lean. So like in terms of in-house, like another company with that revenue level could have had 2 or 3x the size legal team and justified it, and spent less outside. And I mean, there's different ways to do it. But I think like I guess it leads me to ask you the question about like leaving that environment and going into a law firm now where even at a Facebook or Google, there's still reliance on outside counsel because they're in a particular issue more, or they're across a client base more, and they're having varied experiences, or they just trust that person's opinion or their advice. So like, how was that for you to transition where you're like coming out of that legal team where there's subspecialties, or there's a regulatory guy right down the hall from you, and going into a firm now where you're not in the conversations with the engineers, you're not in the conversations with the innovators, the leadership team, et cetera. What's that like for you now?
It's I'm not gonna lie, it's been a bit of a challenge, right? I mean, I mean, there are other aspects of it that are that are great, right? Really, I'm really liking getting to work with a variety of clients and seeing sort of how these issues morph when they cross different industries. But that is a little frustrating, right? To have to be 2 or 3 or more people separated from that engineer who's actually looking at the log file, right? And trying to figure out in a breach, for example, and trying to figure out how to respond and what is really happening. And I think that's a key role that in-house counsel play, right? Is being able to establish that relationship with those parties and translate that to the rest of the legal department, to outside counsel, and even to other parts of the business, right? That a lot of ways, I think the role of good in-house counsel is essentially providing translation services, right? Translating between the business needs and the outside lawyers, or the technologists and the law, and even in some cases between the technologists and the business people, right, who are talking at each other. So it is a little, that aspect of it I miss, right? But I also think that it's an important part of, as you move back outside, being outside, understanding the needs of the business in terms of understanding what the law is part of the value that we have, right? Part of the value that I have, right? Is I can cut through, and my first instinct is not to give a 10-page memo in answer to their question, right? Because I know that's not what they want. It may be, right? I mean, it may be that if you've got a strong in-house counsel, maybe that is what they want, right? They're trying to cover all that 3 sentences, and they may not read all 3 sentences.
I want the one word answer, because usually when I go to outside counsel, I'm asking yes or no questions. Like, does this mean this? Does that mean that? Did I get this right? Am I wrong? Do you hate this strategy? Is this the right strategy? Like, that's how I go to outside counsel, to economize time and cost, right? Even now, I mean, at Facebook, like, it's not like we have like a blank check to do whatever.
Right.
I'm in a more policy role. When I work with outside counsel, I also have to navigate the fact that, like, I'm not really seeking legal advice anymore. Now I'm just like, look, I want a policy angle when I talk to outside advisors, right? And even in the context of a policy angle, that doesn't mean I want these like long-winded, white papers. Like, it's like, my team develops like Facebook's thinking on a policy issue.
Right.
And sometimes we just want like an independent eye on it to like validate what we're thinking or tell us, no, that's nuts, whatever. Like, that's kind of how I approach engaging outside counsel versus farming work out. Because to the point you made earlier, David, like, we have this huge department full of really brilliant people. I'd be wasting their brains if I didn't use it, right? But it's always good to get an outside perspective, because sometimes you start drinking your own Kool-Aid and kind of lose touch with how the world is perceiving what you're doing, right?
Let me
At
just
least that's my experience.
let me just say, it's a very different world when you're the GC and the sole lawyer.
I bet.
And I'm lucky enough now to have, 2 other people on the team here at Alice. Like, and so that feels a little better, but it's not materially different than kind of being on your own. And in that sense, Pedro, what I'm looking for in outside counsel is a little bit different. I think it depends on the thing. There's plenty of times when I might bounce a question, and it might be yes or no, or it might be a conversation. But like, sometimes the what separates it for me from who's like a helpful outside counsel to who's really really helpful and really the go-to people will be the ones that inevitably, and it's not always people that were in-house, but it tends to be sometimes people that were, where they'll go, well, okay, I hear your question, and you need a customer facing document that's 1 page that addresses why you are a value add with respect to your customer dealing with anti-bribery acts, and you need that 1 pager, and I'm going to help you write it. Like, then you just go, as the sole GC, you're like, drop down and go, thank you so much, like, I'm so busy, and exactly what I need. I don't need a memo. You're right, I don't need 10 pages, but brass tacks, what do I need? What does an enterprise customer want?
You don't need a 50-page memo on anti-bribery laws, summary across the world of bribery laws. Can you guys hear my dog barking? Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, Can I just say why he's doing this? Because I think this is important. My TV has a screensaver upstairs, and when it goes into it, it's Samsung's logo, and it bounces around the screen. He's upstairs right now, barking up a shitstorm at this logo as it moves around the screen of my TV. What is wrong with my dog? And shame on Samsung for hypnotizing him. He can't stop barking at this thing. It's so frustrating. I'll be back.
Shout out to Samsung for that.
I have to say, I when I was in house, right, I used outside counsel mostly, a lot like Pedro does, right, in terms of, because we were the type of company we developed that expertise, right? That's what, we weren't generalists. We were, we needed to have that depth of experience, and a lot of other people at the firm had different verticals, had similar kind of experience, right? They're talking to outside counsel when either it gets like incredibly hairy, or to validate, okay, this is what I'm thinking, and it's yes or no, right? Or where am I wrong? And but it's different with smaller companies, right? And that's where the answer becomes a little bit more, okay, how can I help solve your problem? And I think it's interesting that the model doesn't, the law firm model is hard to marry up to that, right? I'm frustrated by that now. I was frustrated by it then, right? That not that I wanted to give away money, but it was valuable to me to have access to outside counsel, but often it was a 20-minute conversation, right? And you want to say, just bill me for 2 hours because this was really, really useful, even though it was only a 20-minute conversation. And I mean, you can't do that, right? Obviously, you don't do that. But now I feel sort of that same way, right? That some of the biggest value that I'm giving to clients is, that 15-minute phone call. And I think there's a question about how do you appropriately bill fairly on both sides for that, right?
We've talked a lot about our relationships with our peer set and outside counsel. So like with our peer set group of people, the round table you're going to come to in a couple of weeks, like there's a Signal WhatsApp group where we're like bouncing stuff off each other. We sometimes wonder if outside counsel should be interacting with us in those that way, and quick hits. And again, like the model doesn't support that, but I would really appreciate if they were just in on the conversation. I wouldn't necessarily, it would be hard to figure out how to bill for that, but it's going to lead to the conversation that's longer and billable. And so I think there's new and fresh thinking that can come around that. When we were looking for, when we were thinking about at Alice who our corporate counsel should be, one of the things I talked about with the firms that we talked to was, I need you to be able to work on Google Docs with me. I need you to be able to text with me. That's how I want to communicate, and my team wants to communicate with you.
Right.
And the firms that are like, of course, that's where you are. We're going to be where you are. Those are the ones that inevitably they're figuring it out and they're tweaking and they're adjusting to get there.
I totally extremely agree. When I came to Facebook, like the outside advisors that I brought with me are the ones that I know are the most flexible, also the smartest, but I'm on my other screen here. I'm watching Elisa Hutnick, who we've had on the podcast before, work on a document that we're working on together right now. I'm watching her do it in Google Docs, and she's texting me in real time. Like, this is how I operate. So if the idea of let's have a weekly conference call, and I'll send you my thoughts in a long email. To David's point earlier, that's dead. Like, there's no way that my generation of lawyers, and especially the ones that come behind us, forget it. There's no chance, zero chance that you're going to be able to do it the old school way, client alerts. I don't need a client alert. I woke up this morning to a text from my outside counsel saying hey, this happened this morning, and it's set off a work stream that we had to do. I can't wait for the firm to create a client alert that's going to come out in 2 days to tell me this. I live in the real time moment. I have to respond, right? And so totally agree with you, Andy. And just speed, I guess, is the essence of all of it. Things have to move fast because the stakes are high, and especially big. It doesn't matter if you're big or small, but if you're Facebook has to be responsive to things in real time, right? Because it's Facebook, but so does Salesforce.
They have
right?
a lot of stuff. They have a lot of stuff to break. They have to move fast and break all that stuff.
No, we don't move fast and break things anymore. That's been gone for a long time. We move carefully and are thoughtful, but
I'm glad that's changed.
It's been changed, but
issue that I mean, frankly, one of the things that I've discovered and been a little surprised about is that that's not universal, right? That there are still a lot of companies that do want that memo, right? That do want that communicate by email at best, right? And that's they're around, and as an outside counsel, right? You want to serve those people too, right?
Oh, of course.
And so it's you have to be thoughtful about that. But those companies are suffering. They're dealing with the same issues that the big companies are dealing with in terms of response times, right? And et cetera, to when they're dealing with their customers, and especially in something like breach response,
right.
There's just there's kind of a difference between at least some people's expectation about how these things work, and the pace at which business has traditionally run, right? That there are occasionally you'll see an article coming out after a big breach critical of a company because they took 72 hours to send out notice, right? And why it took them a whole day to let people know that this was happening, and that's just impossible, right? I mean, and it's certainly impossible if you don't put in the time ahead of time to be ready, right? To have stuff in the can that's ready to go. where you just have to adjust it to the particular facts and you're ready to put it out there. So, I think that's as an outside advisor, that's one of the things that we can bring value to people, is by saying, hey, have you thought about this? What are you going to do, right, if this happens and you have to respond within, a couple of days at the most, right? If you think you got 45 days here, you don't, right?
I'm ready to derail the podcast with just something interesting. You know who David reminds me of, Andy? Have you seen the movie Office Space?
Mm-hmm.
Peter from Office Space, the protagonist of the movie. I feel like David on his way to work definitely listens to gangster rap. I'm pretty confident about this. And I feel like his quiet, kind of like gentle demeanor, under there lies like a privacy rage to get things done that I know exists. I'm telling you. I don't remember his last name, Peter somebody or other, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Oh,
You remind me of him, man. Have you ever destroyed a copy machine?
That's Michael Bolton. You're thinking of Michael Bolton.
Oh, it is Michael Bolton. No, I'm not talking about Michael Bolton's the one who listens to gangster rap. You're right. No, Peter is like the protagonist, right?
Yeah.
The guy who like rebels against like corporate nonsense. Yeah, I feel like you participated in the copier destruction, which I vouch for and think would be amazing. Is it true?
I have never destroyed a copier, but I did once throw a telephone out of a 4-story window. So
you see how we discover things? We need the facts around this.
I was in college. I worked on the newspaper. I was editor in chief of the newspaper.
Nice.
At Rice, and we were having one of those. We had an ancient phone system, right? And it just went out, and I was interviewing somebody, and it went out in the middle of it, and the phone it had to go. And
David was an outlaw in college, Andy. I'm telling you, man. I can see
look, in some sense, I'm not really proud of that, right?
I'm proud of it. Shit, that's amazing.
The telephone, who cares, right? But I think that you have to be. There's something serious here, right? And that you can't do that to people.
Of course.
And look, there were times in college when we yelled at each other, right? And eventually you have to get that, or as soon as possible, right? You have to get that out of your system, and you have to treat people, with a certain amount of respect. So when I think about that, I think, okay, right? I threw the window out. I threw the telephone out the window, but you have to. Taking out an object's one thing, right? You gotta be careful about people. So.
Here's one thing that is sort of Peter-esque about David that you won't know, Pedro. And it's in Office Space, he gets hypnotized, right? And then
that's right.
And then he's off doing things that are sort of like just bucking convention. And one time I walked into work and I saw David and I said, I saw this show. I was probably an early Food Network show, and I was like, it was about this taco shop in a gas station, which happens to be 1 mile from here.
Right.
Are you aware of this place? And he goes, not only am I aware of this place, but we're going for lunch today.
Nice.
So there we are, just like crushing tacos in a gas station parking lot, really. And wasn't much there. And then we went there a bunch of times together afterwards. And that's very like, let me embrace the Zen because the work can wait for an hour. We were working hard enough, and that was one of the things I appreciated about the friendship side of our relationship, for sure.
Oh, were the tacos good? They were worth it?
The tacos were excellent.
Gas station tacos. Where was this? Where was this? In DC, there's a gas station that's got fire tacos.
Yeah, it's at the intersection of Route 175 and Route 1 in Ellicott City, Maryland.
Nice. I love gas station tacos, man. Like those like little. It doesn't even have to be a food truck. Whereas a taco stand inside the gas station.
This was a restaurant.
Yes.
I mean, a restaurant is a kind way to describe
a counter. It was a counter.
Yeah, it was it was
Yeah,
independent.
right.
It was independent, like it was next to the convenience part.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's much better than putting a Subway in the gas station, you know? Like, let's get the taco stand.
Like
going,
some Food Network show went there, you know, they're like, this is legit, and it really is.
Awesome, man. Nothing like some gas vapors while you down some tacos.
So David, you this is natural, right? You grew up in Texas. So like what was that like from a like when did you even become aware of privacy as a thing? Did that ever enter your lexicon before, like when you were growing up in the 80s or 90s, like, or was it just way later in work only?
So I got two, you know, there's the first inkling of kind of, you know, what does it mean about privacy was, I can't remember if it was in Texas or if it was, you know, when I was visiting my grandparents, but I was with my grandfather, and we went to Radio Shack because we're big dorks. And this would have been in the mid 80s, right? Maybe late 80s. And the you know, we bought whatever it was that we were, you know, buying, and the clerk asked my grandfather for his social security number, right?
Oh, you gotta give it up to Radio Shack for being bold, man.
and I mean, this is a thing that Radio Shack did, right, for 15 years probably. And my grandfather's response was, "You don't give me benefits, right? You know, you're not paying my social security check every month, so no, right?" And that was the first moment where I was like, God, you know, this matters. This actually does matter, right?
Well, I got to tell you though, I think it's perfectly fair and proportionate when you go to Radio Shack to buy some AA batteries to give up your social security number. I think it makes perfect sense.
Look, I mean, in the mid-90s, they were printing your social. I mean, back in the day when they used to mail you your 1040,
of course,
on your tax, you know, to fill out your taxes, right? They would pre-print your label with your social security number on it and mail it to you, right? On the outside of the mailing label. And I mean, I can remember that in the mid 90s, it was sort of an innovation. They only did it for a couple of years, but you know, that's a whole other subject in terms of, you know, do we really treat social security numbers appropriately, right? They were never intended to be authentication mechanisms. Why do we use it that way? It's sort of a big, stupid waste of time.
Is that corporation's fault? That's corporations' fault, yeah?
I would put it squarely at the feet of the credit bureaus, actually.
I think that's right, yeah.
Specifically. You know, it's squandered a resource here, right? In the sense that social securities are so useful.
Yeah.
You know, from a database perspective, you know, from the perspective of you know, making sure that you understand that you're talking to me and not the David Hale that lives, you know, a mile down the road.
Exactly.
You know, they're really useful. Why do we use them for authentication where, you know, now suddenly it's super secret, we can't use it anyway? Sorry.
Did you throw the cash register out the window at the Radio Shack?
Should have.
I would have.
Yeah, I mean, I was like 12, right? But
even better.
Anyway, later on, you know, I grew up in Odessa, Texas, which is famous for football, and I was not a football player; I was a swimmer. And but you know, when I was there, when I was my sophomore year in high school, this journalist showed up. Buzz Bissinger, who was from Philadelphia, and he wanted.
What's his name?
What's that?
What's his name? Buzz Bissinger. Oh my God, that we got to make a TV show about that guy. I'm sure
they have.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. I don't know who this is. Okay.
Well, sort of, right? So he wanted to write a book about high school athletics, and he decided that, you know, he really wanted to write about football. So where do you go? You go to
Odessa, Texas.
You go to Odessa, Texas, right? And He interviewed, a gazillion people over a year, right? And, to write this book about high school football, right? And then my senior year, right at the beginning of my senior year, the book came out, Friday Night Lights.
Oh, okay. Now it all
Which,
connects.
was eventually made into a movie and then a TV show. The movie is closely based on the book. The TV show is not. And it suddenly was. It was not the most flattering book, right? I mean, I would say that now, with the hindsight of 30 years, it was fairly accurate, right? I mean, there were definitely some things in it that were a little unfair, but it was fairly accurate. There's nothing in it that was false, let me put it that way. And the problem is that not surprisingly, right, West Texas has a huge racism problem. And
Shocked.
this book that was originally supposed to be about high school athletics really became about being about racism in the South, right? And how that impacts kids, right? High school kids. But the privacy angle here is, suddenly all of these people who were, I mean, I can remember when he was there, right? He would say, "Hey, let's go get lunch," right? And people would be like, "Sure," right? And they would spill their lives for, an hour or 2 hours.
Gas station
He's
tacos.
usually writing this all down, and then it comes out 2 years later, and there's 60 Minutes and the New York Times, and everybody's there interviewing all these people, and it's just a horror show for everybody. Suddenly, you have this view into people's lives that were, I mean, these are not famous people, right? Celebrities have all of these mechanisms that they build up to protect their inner selves. What we see on the National Enquirer is not really who they are, and regular people don't have that, and suddenly being confronted with, wait, all the people understand, have this insight into me and how I live is, frightening. And it's a very disorienting experience. And everybody came out of it really bitter, right? I mean, really hating this guy, really hating this book. I talk to people at home, from where I grew up every once in a while, and they're still mad, 30 years later. And it's that was one of the things that gave me a little bit of insight into why this matters. People weren't, one of the aspects of what we deal with in privacy, day to day, is this disconnect between people wanting to give up information or being willing to give up information in the short term without really understanding the long-term impact. Right. And I mean, this is one of those debates that keeps coming up over and over again in the, in the privacy community, right? Those of us who are geeking out on privacy and going to IAPP and things like that. It's one of our big three concerns, maybe, right? Is that people don't really understand what information they're giving up. And that's our explanation for why they keep doing it, despite the fact that we think that it's bad for them, and I think there's some validity there. I think it's maybe overstated, but that was sort of a big picture that the media descending on this small town was kind of a sudden big picture embodiment of what happens subtly every day, in a small way every time we go to a website and say, yeah, okay, I'll tell you, this information about me in order to get this coupon.
Let's end on this question because it's the most important question of the day here. So I live in Georgia. I'm from Florida. I've lived in Virginia, Mississippi, North Carolina, these places. The South.
Yeah.
Is Texas in the South?
That's a really good question. So as an aside, right, I took an entire course in college on that, right? And the answer is the eastern half of Texas is in the South, right? And I mean, it's very South. But even when you get out of that and you get into West Texas, where I grew up, there was a lot of South there, right? And I'd even argue that in some ways, the South has stopped being a geographic location and started being kind of a way of looking at the world. And I think you can argue that places like Idaho are part of the South, right? And it's not just about racism, but a lot of it's about racism. Northern Virginia, not the South, right?
Sure.
I mean, it's just not. Maryland's, really isn't either. But places where it's, what are you looking at, right? What it's a way of looking at life in terms of, again, I think that racism is an incredibly important part of it, but sort of obvious, right? The less obvious part is, things like, how do you make money, right? Are you making stuff, or are you pulling stuff out of the ground? Are you and how does that shape your politics, right? Are you producing stuff out of the intellectual property, or are you producing value by creating something that's like, intellectual property, or are you pulling oil out of the ground, or cotton? And those are very different mindsets, and they tend to go regionally, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely the racial history part of what Southernness means, and I agree with you that is a component. I think there's another one, which is like disposition, and demeanor, right? There's like a Southern style of being, and
absolutely.
right? And to end on a light note, the test I like to apply is whether you're from Texas or you're from the South, right? Is if you think it's appropriate to wear a cowboy hat to a wedding, you're Texan, you're not from the South. That's just the way I look at it, right? It's just you're not from the South. And
I don't want to be negative about it, right? I mean, there's aspects of Southernness that are, that are wonderful, that are great, right? I mean, people who are, there's a grace there. There's a certain standard. There's a certain standard of behavior.
Pageantry of Southernness. Yep.
Being kind to each other, and that's very direct, right? When you're face to face, it's a little bit less maybe when you're talking in the abstract. But it's, hey, I live in Maryland. It's, I didn't go all the way out from the South, so it's a good thing.
Nice. That's all I got. We have solved a big problem.
Yeah, we did it. We did it.
We did it.
All right, David, thanks for dialing in and talking with us. It's great to see you. We're seeing our friends this way. So,
I know, man, it's been a while. Yeah, I'm glad you're doing well, David. Congrats on the transition. I know it's been a little bit, but I'm sure you're gonna rock it.
Yeah, it's thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and don't be strangers.
Yeah, we'll see you in person sometime.
For some cold coffee and some cold breakfast, hopefully.
We don't like that right about now, I think.
I'm in.
Take it. All right.
All right. Good to see you guys.
Good, man.